higher volume that time. Yeah, I know. I have to unmute it and stuff first. Right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Blueprint for Maryland's Future Special Education Work Group meeting number 7. My name is Dr. Brian Morrison, and I'll be kicking us off today. Please make sure you mute yourself upon entry and make sure your name appears on your screen. If you don't know how to do that, you can just click the 3 little buttons at the top of your little screen. That's your options, and then you can rename yourself. This will help us move people into their breakout groups later. So if you're noticing your name that says iPhone 4 or something similar, please make sure it has your actual name. Please know that we are recording this, so here is the Zoom privacy and confidentiality statement. This will be recorded and posted on YouTube, so please be aware of that. If you require a sign language interpreter, you can click the interpretation button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click ASL. If you require a translation to Spanish, you can click the interpretation button and click Spanish. And please know that closed captioning is available at the bottom of your screen. With all that being said, I will turn it over to Dr. Collins to get us started.
Great, thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you've been well. The weather has shifted for sure. I don't know if you noticed snow flurries yesterday. I did when I was driving, but happy spring. So I'm super excited. I love spring. I bring you greetings on behalf of Dr. Wright. Unfortunately, Dr. Wright had an unexpected event to come up, so she's not able to join. But we're super excited about the work you're doing. I can't believe we're at meeting number 7. We have been rocking and rolling and making adjustments along the way, and so we're very appreciative of your time. Today's meeting, we're going to highlight information from our last meeting. Again, look at the proposed recommendations, and we want to make sure we continue to get input from the team here as we gear up to write our mid-year report. Time is ticking. It came by so fast, so we want to make sure we're still circling back with you all. We'll have a lot of small group time today, and we really want to make sure that everybody is actively participating in those small groups as we talk about looking at knowledge and skills and expertise between special educators and general educators, as well as recruitment and retention. So really excited about those discussions, and then exit ticket reflections. And so we will accomplish a great deal this evening, but glad to know that a majority of our meeting will be in small group discussions. So with that said, I'll turn it to Liz for opening comments and welcome as well. Take it away, Liz.
Yep. Thanks, Dr. Collins. Wonderful to see everybody. Yeah, the only thing I'll say is, I just think it's exciting to talk about teachers. Although I am not a teacher myself, a lot of family history of teachers in my family, sister, aunts, grandmother, and of course teachers are the most important folks in a school building after the kids. So that is it's important that we turn our attentions to them, and to rethink and reimagine, right? That's just always want to kind of level set that's the charge of the blueprint, as we've set out expectations and talked about the integration of general and special education and specially designed instruction, to rethink and reimagine the knowledge, skills, and expertise that general and special educators have to have in order to effectively teach students with disabilities, and then what we can do particularly to create environments and working conditions that will encourage the retention of educators. So places where educators can be their most effective and feel job satisfaction and joy. That's the task. So, looking forward to all the conversation today.
Thank you. It's me. I know your group is used to Carmen Brown being the person who leads this conversation. Unfortunately, she's unable to be here today. I'm Antoine Hickman, I'm Assistant Superintendent for DEI Special Ed Services, in case you didn't know. Public comment, we have two. One of them I will read, and then the second one, we do have a guest. The first one is very small. It's from Michelle Davis from ABC's for Life Success. Her public comment begins now. Today's meeting is about quality educators. Quality educators can be effective only with the right tools. One such tool is engineering master scheduling by school administrators in a way that facilitates co-planning and co-teaching by special education and general educators. Most Maryland students with disabilities are served in the general education classroom. Master scheduling that allows the design and implementation of specially designed instruction is one of the most powerful tools in our shed to break down general and special education silos and provide true high quality special education instruction in general education. That completes the public comment from Michelle Davis. Our guest today, our registered guest is Mr. Melvin Towns. Mr. Towns has been versed in understanding that he has 3 minutes. The time will be monitored by staff. When the time expires, the speaker is permitted to finish their sentence, but is required to make no further remarks. Comments shall be directed to the entire work group, not to an individual, and work group members will not respond to the speaker's comments, but will take all comments under advisement. At this time, Mr. Melvin Towns, please unmute. Dr. Morrison or
Dr.
anyone?
Hickman, I am not seeing him online.
Okay. In that case, we will move on. If he joins and if the work group will allow, we will allow him to give his public comment a little later in the meeting. So with that said, we're going to go to the next agenda item, and that would be our highlights from our February 28th meeting. Ms. Zagri?
Okay, so just to give the really quick high-level overview of where we came from, we set expectations for students with disabilities to be enabled to achieve grade level standards, and also that lowercase e expectation, sort of believing in students with disabilities. We talked about the integration of general and special education, the dismantling of silos, the setting up of multi-tiered systems of support so that students can get the right support at the right time, specially designed instruction, evidence-based best practices. And then we last session really focused on effective implementation of IEPs. So we talked about the continuous improvement cycle, the setting up of standards, and then technical assistance, data collection and monitoring, and that cycle of support and enforcement. So we took all the feedback that we got from the small groups and from the exit tickets, and I'm just going to give you a quick kind of rundown of that, but I think we also had emailed you this sort of distillation. In technical assistance, we heard from everybody about how to provide technical assistance and then what should be included, what the content should be. So in terms of the how, we heard a lot about direct support from MSDE, more attention to who gets technical assistance, making sure we don't forget about general educators, transition coordinators, IEP chairs, et cetera. And that the guidance really needs to be more accessible, easier to understand, differentiated for different audiences, perhaps searchable in some kind of accessible platform. And then in terms of what technical assistance people were identifying, it was mostly around evidence-based practices, tutoring, high leverage practices, discipline, and also around how to collect data, why we'd collect data, and training in the monitoring process to facilitate greater self-monitoring within LEAs. Then in terms of data collection, again, we heard how and then what. So in the how was mostly focused on universal data tools that multiple stakeholders can use to input data. And then in terms of the what, that the focus of data collection should really be progress monitoring on student goals, which should be aligned to standards and student needs, a focus on narrowing the gap, reasonably calculated services, that the instructional practices are evidence-based, and then around supplementary aids, data collection around outcomes and growth measures. And then monitoring. So who should be on monitoring teams, and that cycle of coaching, support, and then enforcement. And all the details from that will be distilled into a recommendation we'll look at in a minute. And then one other area that we collected information from you both in the small group discussions and then particularly in the exit tickets was around the Maryland Online IEP database. And the feedback from work group members was mostly around ease of use, things like drop-down menus, but also making sure that it allows for flexibility and creativity, that we really honor the I in individualizing education programs, and that there's this focus on student needs. Also on customizable reporting, making sure that it's flexible in that way. And finally, we heard some feedback around the challenges with the current Maryland Online IEP for families that don't speak English as their native language. And so that was the feedback that we heard, and we are going to, I think, now turn to the recommendations that we tried to craft out of that feedback.
Before we do, if you don't mind,
oh, sure.
Add just a little bit. So in addition, as we know, each month we meet and we hear the recommendations or the feedback, and we come together and try to put together some things so we can develop the recommendations. But while that is going on, from the time that we meet to the next, we also get out in the field. And so being in the field and going into the districts and speaking with the LEAs and also teachers, just want to add just a few things. One, to the technical assistance. So we do get some commendation for technical assistance, but the request has been, as Mrs. Zogby said, a few things, but the only things that we've heard out in the field is that they need to be in some smaller digestible chunks. There's requests for, let's say, snippets or videos. There's a request so that it's not a long narrative, but a teacher can grab the information, or teacher or the administrator can grab the information and pretty much access it quickly. So you did mention accessibility, but the smaller chunks, digestible, maybe in some bullets or highlights, is something that's very helpful. You did very good with the technicals, with the other monitoring and the other piece. I do want to touch on the MOIEP. As we added that to our conversation last month, it has to do with some of the potential legislation that's out there to even consider convening a task force. And as recent as this week, we've been presented with convening a task force for the MOIEP as well as the online IFSP. And so we're going to be seeking feedback from this group as well as convening work groups and getting information on how to address that. There's a list that has been communicated to us that I say exhaustive, it's exhausting, but it's not an exhaustive list that we are going to review. We're going to get the feedback, and we're going to try to make everything, we want it to be efficient. We want it to provide the outcomes we want it to represent the teachers and the students, and we want to make sure that it is usable and friendly, and it does address the needs of parents or families in their native language. So we will work on those things, but we do look to you to help us with our recommendations and making sure that it makes it into the report, and it's things that we'll be working on concurrently. Ms. Zogby, to the recommendations now?
Yeah.
Dr. Hickman and Liz, there appears to be a Mel on now if you want to jump to the public comment before we move on to proposed recommendations.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. Mr. Towns, we are you there? it's the time that we do have public comment, and we have one registered participant, Melvin Towns Jr. Are you there? You can unmic, and you have 3 minutes. Let's see. Hello.
Hi, it's actually Melissa Brunson. I apologize.
No, no problem, Ms. Brunson. No problem. We were looking for Melvin Towns Jr.
My apologies.
No problem. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. We'll go on to the proposed recommendations.
Okay, so these recommendations were circulated, I think, twice over the last couple of weeks. So let's just real quickly run through them. Do you want me to do that, Dr. Hickman? Okay, so the first one is to develop for MSDE to develop a plan to address effective implementation of IEPs. This is technical assistance, uniform data collection, and monitoring, and to develop that plan within 60 days. The plan would cover technical assistance. So some of the things we talked about, more support and coaching for IEP teams and LEAs, clear achievable standards linked to available resources, menus of evidence-based best practices, accessible differentiated guidance documents for educators and professional development, uniform data collection, including the need for review and revision of current data elements, and technical assistance for collection and analysis of data. And then on monitoring, clear communication of the monitoring requirements and the criteria used to determine compliance, that balance between support and enforcement, and review of the composition of monitoring teams. So let's pause there and see if anybody has any feedback, additions, subtractions, objections, etc. Okay. So hearing none, I think we're going to proceed with approval of that. If you have an objection, you should note it in the chat or unmute, and otherwise we're going to take that as assent on that recommendation and move on to the next, which is that MSDE should review the Maryland online IEP, including data collection, reporting capabilities, user experience, and current mechanisms for feedback and revision, and report on suggested improvements and or alternatives to the Maryland Online IEP within 6 months. We are going to, I think, include there's one edit that we're going to make to this to include that part of the review should include particular attention to families that do not speak English as their native language. And again, I'll pause for some feedback or additional concerns.
I think we've had a couple conversations and from some emails that we've received that didn't make it. So I don't know. This group is kind of silent, but they do love to text, type, and send emails. We would also consider that first part of this sentence. So not only the Maryland Online IEP, but also the IFSP. Even though they're two separate systems, and many don't know that, but it would require separate looks and a separate convening. So I think Ms. Zogby, based on your recommendation, the recommendation in front of them is one to include the online IFSP and also some language that directs us to look at native language or remove any language barriers if that's amenable to the group.
Jade, go ahead.
So I just had a question. It says, and report on suggested improvements and alternatives. To whom would that report be provided? Would it be made public? Would it be provided back to this group? Where would that report go?
I'll respond both. It's going to be reported back to this group. This going to be it'll be reported back to this group. It'll be public. There are work groups that are already convening. Like the next work group we have for the MOIEP is on April 10th. It was scheduled, I think last month I shared it was March 28th, but we received feedback that that meeting was scheduled during several districts' spring break, so we moved it up. And I thought I saw another question about will there something to the effect of will other districts be required? Well, that's part of the conversation that the work group is looking at, and that was also part of the conversation from House Bill 1237 proposed. So we will consider that as well.
And then Renee is asking, who is the user? Is it the teacher, the family, or both?
Well, the teacher mostly, the family does benefit from the output. There's opportunities for the parents and everyone to truly engage in the IEP process, but the user is the person, the teacher and the related service providers who are providing input into that system.
And I would just add that I think in terms of the family, part of that is the reporting also, right? Is the making sure that there's reports that families can access. And then Dr. Hickman, do you want to follow up the question from Jade about, is there a cost to the LEAs to use the Maryland Online IEP?
My answer, Mr. Morrison, Dr. Morrison, the answer would be no.
Yes, there is no cost for the LEAs to utilize the online IEP. It's fully covered by MSDE.
Thank you. Then I don't understand why they don't want to use it. I mean, that's good value. So thank you very much.
All right. So given the proposed recommendation in front of you and pending the additions of IFSP and a statement to address natural language, how did you say? Silence was agreement? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, we'll take your silence as assent. That's the, yeah. Speak up or forever hold your peace, I think is the other way to say that.
Never, I'm in after this. Okay. Okay. Hearing none and seeing none in the chat of disagreement, we will add these recommendations to the previous ones agreed upon. All right, we have Mr. Levinson from K-12 Solutions has returned to keep us engaged. Mr. Levinson, are you ready?
I am. I was born ready. Very excited to have this, to listen in on this conversations today. As you know from the agenda, we have two very big topics that are certainly related, but they are big and important. So we have decided to have 2 rounds of discussion so we can focus each round on one of our 2 topics for the day. The first topic being the knowledge, skill, and expertise of special educators and general educators. We know that both players are critical to the success of students with disabilities. So we're going to have that first discussion. We're going to ask Dr. Hickman to share, if just for a couple minutes, any of his initial thoughts or things that are underway. But then we'll get into the small groups for about 25 minutes to really hear your wisdom and your experience. And then we'll come back out of the small groups. As you know, we'll be taking notes in the small groups to capture your thoughts. But we also know there's value in sharing for the whole group to learn from each other. And then after we do that sharing out, we'll go back into small groups for a second round on that topic of encouraging recruitment and retention of special educators. So we'll do it in 2 pieces. And I think the first piece on the knowledge, skills, and expertise, Dr. Hickman, anything you want to share to set up this conversation, particularly either thoughts you've already had or efforts already underway?
Certainly, thank you. So in terms of knowledge, skills, and expertise, if you saw I'm sure that everyone participated and did the pre-reading, but you do understand that in that with knowledge is that both general and special education teachers should have a deep understanding of the educational theories, the teaching methods, and curriculum standards. And when in terms of skills, we're looking at the communication, the ability to effectively communicate with students, parents, and colleagues. In terms of organization, the skill in managing classroom activities, lesson plans, and student records. In terms of adaptability, capacity to adjust teaching strategies to meet diverse student needs, and then patience. It is essential for working with students of varying abilities and behaviors in terms of with those skills. Now, in terms of expertise, we want to focus on like differentiation. Do teachers have the ability to skill and tailor instruction to accommodate students with diverse learning styles and abilities, and classroom management, with the ability to create a supportive and inclusive learning environment? I share those things, and then I state to you that something that what we're working on in MSDE and teaching and learning along with our colleagues in other divisions to address the blueprint is we're currently working on an inclusive guide for general and special educators. In that guide, we're looking at content, some content areas, and how accommodations, what accommodations be needed, what modifications may be needed, skill set, and then knowledge, skills, and expertise to narrow the gap. We're also looking at the ethical pieces, the social emotional learning as well, and embedding those practices throughout as we develop the guide to support. Keeping in mind, we're also listening when we talked about technical assistance. The request is about in our technical assistance to make it more digestible, to bring out the highlights and be able to, so a teacher can grab it, read it, have it on their desk, and it's more of a guide than it's more of a guide and guidance than directive. So with that, that tee it up for you to go into your groups, into your breakout sessions.
Before we do, I just want to pose, and I don't know if we have a slide for this. I think we've shared it in advance, but the 3 big questions.
After that, move forward. One slide forward, I think.
Okay. Perfect. Just so obviously you can take the conversations where you think they should go, but we really tried to break down and organize the discussion, perhaps that first highest level question of what is the knowledge, skills, and expertise that's needed. But then once we've kind of thought about, hey, gen ed and special ed teachers should know X, Y, and Z, the 2 follow-up questions where we really love your insights as well. And that is, how can educator preparation programs, and the licensure requirements, these are 2 levers, how can they be forcefully used to ensure that the knowledge, skills, and expertise is there in new staff? And then the last question is, again, having determined what we think teachers should know and be able to do, the skills, knowledge, and expertise, what is the right mix of role for higher ed versus the LEAs in developing those skills? So yes, we want to know what the skills are, knowledge and expertise, but also your thoughts on how do we create systems and structures that help teachers get those skills. So with that, I will turn it over to the tech folks to get us into the small groups. I think we know the routine now. We've got note takers as well.
But just one thing, if you go back, thank you for going back to the small breakouts. Yes, they have asked us in the chat to bear with us as they move us. If you're in group 1 or you require ASL, please stay in group 1, and we'll move from there. Any other pieces, tech team, that we want them to know?
And also, let's stay in these groups for 25 minutes, so a healthy amount of time to have an important discussion.
25 minutes it is. 24 minutes.
While we're taking time to, while IT is taking time to move folks to their rooms, I would remind attendees that only workgroup members should be on the Zoom. If you are not a workgroup member, a designated workgroup member, appointed workgroup member, you can attend this meeting via the YouTube channel, but please do not log into the Zoom. Thank you. Second announcement, I'm being told everything will be done within 2 minutes.
Good evening, breakout room 1. We are all clear. We can begin this breakout room. Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, breakout room 1. We are all clear. You can begin now. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we're ready.
We're a pretty big group, and looks like we we haven't stayed entirely consistent week to week, month to month, but that's okay. We'll make it work.
We have Buzz in our group this time. This is going to be good.
Yep. All right. So we need a reporter and yeah, we need a reporter, right? And a timekeeper.
I have a timekeeper, and Kelly Meisner is going to be our note taker.
Great. Yep. And we need someone to report out at the end. Who would like to do that? Not Tom does not want to do it. Who does want to do it?
Nobody.
Oh, great. Thank you, Betsy. That we appreciate that.
No problem.
All right. So question 1 is knowledge, skills, and expertise. General educators, special educators. I think, you know, if I was going to throw it out, I would like to hear what people think about sort of what we were talking about, the common trunk, kind of what both general and special educators need to have, and then what each one of those kind of groups would need to have.
Liz, not to cut across you, but The question is in the chat if someone is not wondering what the question is. Ms. Holman?
Well, I think Betsy had her hand up first if she wanted to go before me.
Hi, no problem. Hi, I'm Betsy Perry. I'm a 30-year veteran special education teacher, national board certified in Montgomery County. And Montgomery County has a unique body called CTL, Councils for Exceptional Teaching. I'm sorry, Councils on Teaching and Learning. And we just met yesterday and we had a visitor from the central office that was from special education. Even though we deal with curriculum and instruction, of course, other things bubble up. And this was one of the topics that we discussed. So you're getting feedback, not just from me, but also from a cadre of teachers from across the county. So one of the things that they said that the expertise is because of the increased challenge behaviors post-COVID, they're saying that, you know, most general education teachers are special education teachers, that we need to make sure that general education teachers are getting professional development, and it's behavior. We cannot have effective learning in the classroom if we don't have the behaviors under control. So I think we also need to implement more strategies with restorative practices. A lot of teachers across the state are traumatized by some of these challenging behaviors from both general education students and special education students. There's a extremely high increase in aggressive and physical altercations, behaviors between students and staff. We have multiple staff that are on leave because of concussions and serious injury from some of these issues. So most of the general ed teachers did cry out for more support with behavior management. Lastly, for the special education teachers, again, more supportive professional development for behavior. I am a member of the crisis team at my school to deal with students when they have those major outbursts, but only a small amount of staff get trained in CPI. And the way things are going now, most staff need to be trained in CPI. I also have a certificate for restorative practices that was offered through MCEA. And the way that it's being rolled out in different organizations and districts is not with fidelity. In order for restorative practices to be done with fidelity, there are many process steps and processes. And I feel like there's been a sprinkling of training and a sprinkling of how it is being utilized. Lastly, we really need to deal with the culture. Teachers are so overwhelmed and abused that they need coping support and professional development. I believe in clean slate. I've most of my career worked with students with challenging behaviors, so it's not a big deal to me. But for a general ed teacher to have some of these students in their class, it's a little shocking for some of them. And so they need some professional development on how they can, you know, readjust and get back in the classroom and start a fresh day the next day. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kay.
Thank you so much. Kay Holman, I'm an associate professor at Towson University in the Department of Special Education. I want to definitely first start by echoing Betsy Perry's comments and thanking her for bringing those directly from the teachers in Montgomery County. I think those are really important points. I would say in terms of, for both subsets of educators, I would say that in terms of instruction, it's the proficiency in the implementation of the UDL guidelines, Universal Design for Learning, which is obviously very aligned with differentiation, but again, that ability to have multiple ways of assessing knowledge, of providing information, of determining what students know is really important. I also think that teachers need to have proficiency in the skills of co-teaching and interdisciplinary collaboration. And I have some more comments about that when we get to personal prep programs. And then 2 other points: strong communication skills to effectively manage other adults in the classroom. I hear that as a challenge from a lot of new teachers, especially. And then to be able to collaborate with other professionals and most importantly, to partner with all families, even families from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Competency in social emotional learning, which has been spoken to already. And I think that's it for now.
Thank you. Dee? And you don't have to wait for me to call on you. Just, unmute.
Keep it moving. Okay. DSAP, I am the chair for the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. I am vice chair for Charles County CCAC. I am the executive director for 2 nonprofits and the mom of a son with autism and intellectual disability. What I think, which kind of sums up what everyone before me said, I think soft skills would be the best thing across the board for both. Specifically, the ability to improvise, pivot, and be innovative without changing the curriculum, because whenever that seems to be asked of teachers or IEP teams, that's usually the pushback. We have a specific curriculum, we've got MSDE requirements, but there's lots of flexibility in that for ways to think outside of the box, be innovative. But to add to that, I think that educators should be culturally in tune with the local LEA. What you do, like our county has a huge shift of educators that have come from Montgomery County, and we're in Charles County, but what worked in Montgomery County absolutely does not work in Charles. So wherever you are, this goes against, your professional expertise, but learning the culture of where you are, I think is very, very important. And I think becoming aware of any cultural biases that you have, meaning not presuming competence, but that certainly affects teaching methods, your patience, your ability to innovate, of what that is. So, and lastly, the student first approach, it's a mindset shift a bit for the educators. I do know teachers have it hard, but just reframing when we're talking about behavior, I definitely agree with what Ms. Perry said, that behavior is an issue, but if you look at it as if they're having a hard time as opposed to they're giving us a hard time, I think we can really brainstorm on how to fix this. So it definitely takes a mind shift of what the problems are. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Badawi, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I just saw that I was still muted. So I would agree. I don't think I'm qualified to talk about some of the educational underpinnings. I do, from what I know of UDL, I think that would be, that certainly is good for both general ed and special education teachers. But the behavior, training and behavior management, and that doesn't just mean consequences and doubling down when a child is acting out, but taking a trauma-informed approach. I know the state Trauma-Informed Care Commission is going to be making some recommendations about training folks in all different public-facing agencies, including obviously MSDE. But I think a trauma-informed approach for everyone. I think understanding many times for children with disabilities, behavior is communication, obviously, and learning how to understand what they're communicating and manage that. But also I think there need to be more resources, for if you're not in a smaller classroom with children with disabilities, I don't know how a teacher with 25, 28, 30 kids in their classroom is supposed to deal without some extra help. So I think, yes, education is needed, but teachers also have to have the resources.
hate to be the bad guy. Time is ticking. If you do have a comment, you can braid it into the next one. That'll be fine. I want to move to the next question. That's okay, Ms. Zob?
Yeah, please. So educator preparation programs and licensure requirements for certification and recertification could be aligned with these knowledge, skills, and expertise. So I think in the advanced reading, it spoke to the way that we currently do it. So there's educator preparation programs. We should talk about that. If you look at past recommendations, there have been past recommendations about focusing on dual certification. It also, I think, lays out the current sort of buckets of licenses that we have. So, there's a couple different grade bands for special education. So I'm just interested in people, do we feel like what you envision as the best teachers we could have for students with disabilities, general educators, special educators, does the current setup of the way those licenses are structured and our education preparation programs feed into that? Go ahead, Dr. Badawi.
And so I would echo something that Dee had said, that yes, there needs to be education, but this is also a culture shift. I used to work at the Maryland School for the Blind, and we would have many trainings about autism and behavioral rigidity, and teachers were there and they learned and they did well. But that if that attitude was still there, that this child is trying to get one over on me, or he can't just keep getting his way, that is a really hard culture to shift from. And so I think that, obviously, again, I'm not currently working in a school, but I think that has to come from the top down and from the bottom up and horizontally, to really emphasize trying to understand a child's behavior in the midst of it being really hard to manage while you're, again, trying to manage everyone else in the classroom. And I wish I had some bright ideas about how to change a culture, but I think that I think that's important. Thank you.
I wasn't going to share it first because it's been many. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Miss Hoffman was talking to herself. No, she's muted. But she was talking. You're still muted. No sound. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miss Perry. Is that right, Miss Hoffman? Yeah. Go ahead, Miss Perry.
I'll be quick. I was going to answer first because I graduated from college like almost 3 decades ago. Even though I do constantly take classes, I just finished a psychology class for adolescents, and I have shifted my thinking and how I dealt with some students in school. So I think making sure that we look at making sure that current programs have a very robust cadre of classes that deal with psychology and development. I'm not saying they don't. Like I said, I graduated a long time ago, but I took this last class to add another licensure, and it was eye-opening. I actually, shifted my thinking and how I was dealing with some students. So just really making sure that students in these preparation programs have what they need that's current. Sometimes the research and the data that they're looking at and information sources are old, and we really need to, after 30 years in this game, things are really different than they were in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So we need to make sure that the information and theories and research and instructional materials are very current, dealing with what's going on now with our student population.
Go ahead, Buzzy.
Thank you. I'm not very well versed in ed prep and licensure requirements, but it seems to me that one issue would be specialization for in ed prep and licensure requirements. I know that's a controversial issue because of the continuum that exists within any particular disability. But that's, I think, and some states do more specialization than Maryland. I forget exactly what a specialized certifications are required, but when I looked it up a long time ago, some states did more specialization than Maryland. Again, I know it's something of a controversial question, but I certainly think it needs to be examined.
Ms. Holman has her hand raised next.
Yes, I was going to add on to a little bit of Badawi's comments around mindset shift and to speaking to the necessary for inclusion and kind of having a more presumption of competence of our students and capabilities across both special and general educators. And then also to the personal preparation programs, the importance of recognizing that there could be a lot of knowledge shifting and changing in that preparation program, but it really needs to address this in-service teachers who haven't come back for recertification, and how are we getting that information into them so that that change and innovation of thought and strategies are infiltrated in service and as well as teacher prep. And then the other thing I would say is that the importance of cross-discipline training. And I know right now we have a grant that is supplemental because we can't afford in the amount of credit hours that teachers have to, or special educators have to get right now to have this embedded in. So we have a supplemental training program, but the importance of learning alongside a speech language pathologist will help with teachers' ability to implement augmentative communication devices in the classroom, to better understand behavior, to better understand social communication. So I think thinking about ways to support personal prep programs to offer more interdisciplinary collaborative training programs would be beneficial.
Points well taken. I think we may be getting the boot in a minute. So let's move on to the next question. The next question, I can't see it.
Sorry, it's the role of higher education versus LEAs in developing those required knowledge, skills, and expertise. I'm gonna jump in with just two quick thoughts. One is directly to this question, and a little bit of, I think, what Dr. Holman was saying. In my discussions with student teachers in the school building that I spend the most time in, I feel like I've had teacher candidates and students tell me, well, at school they tell us this, but then you go to do your internship or as a student teacher, and it's like, well, the way we do it in the real world is this. So that disconnect, I think, is a real challenge. So so that's one piece. And then I also would just really love if people, as you're commenting on this higher ed and LEAs, if you also could weave in anything around the value of dual certification, if you think that that is something that's valuable, that should be emphasized. I see nodding heads. And the importance of special educators having content knowledge, because it seems, and I could be wrong, but my understanding of reading the regulations around licensure is that our special educators in our state don't need a lot of content knowledge. And I wonder about that, particularly when you get to middle school. I just see it even in my personal experience that, my daughter's special educator doesn't know middle school science very well. It's pretty hard to do that collaboration and to adapt materials when you don't actually know the content. So. Anybody got anything? Somebody think that's something good, Dr.
Excellent.
I
don't think I'm supposed to talk. So. Go ahead, Ms. Holman.
Just really quickly on that last comment, I think that the dual certification programs would help with the content knowledge. Having similar classes and content requirements across general educators and special educators, and learning how to differentiate and modify curriculum together would be an incredible step forward for co-planning and co-teaching, which we know is best practice for more inclusive education.
Buzzy got his hand raised.
Thank you. I don't know the answer, but I'm curious about the respective roles of higher education versus is bad, higher education and MSDE and LEAs. I assume that I don't know who is responsible for licensure requirements. Is that higher ed? Is that MSDE? Educator preparation programs, I assume that is basically in higher education compared to ongoing coaching and support in the school systems. But it seems to me it would be helpful to understand the different responsibilities.
Go ahead, Dee.
Hi, I've been chewing on this question for a minute, trying to tackle it, because I definitely, in the perfect world, agree with all of these things. But, you know, I fear the more restrictive, the more we require, the fewer special educators we're actually going to get or retain on the onset. So that's why I'm trying to really chew on this for a minute. But my initial response is that for higher education, I do think that it should lay a solid ground or baseline for what special education is and what it entails. On the LEA level, just knowing that our educators are recruited from neighboring states or people move, that's where that additional training, I think, would come in handy on what works specific for your area. On the higher education level, I just completed some courses last year where there was a huge overlap of the understanding of epigenetics in developing IEPs and having conversations with students, and those external factors and supports outside of the school system certainly shape what any type of plan that you have for the students. So I know that's a shift. Someone here mentioned it not long ago about how education is shifting in this space, and everyone may not be able to go back to school, but certainly those external factors is something that maybe can be introduced at an LEA level, so that when you bring teachers in, they're not bringing in experience from another area. So basically you're giving them a boot camp of how things are done where you are and best practices. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. I know I'm not supposed to talk as a rep. I want to. As a former, so as an LEA, right? As a person like 6 months ago, in a large district, it was my responsibility to make sure that I developed the teachers, making sure that they receive what they didn't get in school. You know, when you have these accelerated programs, right? Accelerated program number one, but then you have a gen ed teacher program who has minimal special ed training. It's not it's just by design. Even with the special educators, there's minimal content training because they're dealing with the characteristics and disabilities and dealing with a number of things, right? And then behavior management in the classroom at a college is real difficult to teach. It's all theory. So you don't get it until you get into the school. So it is a function, it is a responsibility of the LEA to develop, to encourage. It helps with morale, it helps with job retention, and we're gonna get to that later. But those are the things that people appreciate when they're getting having their needs met. It is a dual responsibility. We do, as the state, determine what the certification looks like. But in terms of that knowledge, they can give you the knowledge, but the skills and expertise, there's a lot that needs to be done on the job, and it's a responsibility, own responsibility of the school.
I have a question for you, Dr. Hickman. How do you get I completely agree with what you're saying, but how do you get your peers to buy into that mindset? Because not everyone agrees that the LEA should be responsible for all of those things.
Well, I would say a lot of my peers, we won't do this level. Let's take it to my principals. Let's go when I was a principal. Principals recognized that in order to have their needs met, they had to access training, access professional development, bring in something as you were trained as leaders to give these professional developments on the fly, like a lunch and learn, a breakfast with a book talk, making sure that you have information that's readily available for a teacher to grab, so to be able to serve their children. So I do believe that is a belief in most of the administrators. But then when you go to different places, you have you have unions, you have people that believe outside of their workday that they should be compensated to sharpen their skill set, and not everyone subscribes to professional development, and then there's not enough time in this academic calendar. Those are reasons. They sound like excuses, but they are. Contractually, you have 180 days or 200 days in the contract. How much time do you have for professional development? How much time do you have to sit, learn, or to go, or to be able to do that on top of all the other things you have? So those are reasons. But to get our college, I think that people do understand it. But then, when it comes to practicality, practical, those things get in the way. Yeah, they need me on the 25 minutes has to be up.
Yes, that is correct. We will be moving everyone back in shortly. Please stand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Dr. Hickman, everyone should return in about 25 seconds. It's just counting down now. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back. You mean I had 2 more minutes? I could have used another minute in my breakout room.
Well, we're going to be back in the breakout rooms in a few minutes again, so we can continue that dialogue. We definitely had a very energetic hats off to group 2, and we will share out. So I'd love to hear, and as you know, your conversations, we did have note taking, and we will share in writing, but love to hear from folks, highlights, 2-3 minutes of some of the big ideas that you all discussed. So if I could seek a volunteer from group 1 to unmute and give us a couple minutes of the highlights of your discussion.
Hi, Betsy Perry, special education teacher from Montgomery County, representing MSEA. We talked about, it was refreshing to hear from a parent and a parent advocate talking about a mind shift. We discussed some of the current challenges post-COVID with behaviors in the schools and making sure we have professional development for staff. We talked about professional development for general education teachers to have more special education classes and support for professional development. For higher education, we discussed dual certification, and it might not be popular, but special education candidates to have an area of concentration, especially in the secondary realm, because sometimes they're leaving college and not really prepared per se if they have a very intensive math class that they're supporting. We talked about partnerships and in higher education. We have some current professors that discussed making sure that the students know pedagogy and are up to date on current best practices, and the need to definitely explore more support and professional development around social emotional support and more opportunities for collaboration. And anyone else can feel free to jump in for anything I left out.
Hey, you covered a lot of ground there, and there was a lot of great ideas. Group 2, my group, Winifred, you want to give a highlight?
Sure. So we started off talking about universal design and folks not really understanding what it is and implementing it. But the highlight was, you guys, we solved the problem. We solved the problem of how teachers can come out and be prepared. Diane talked about her 5-year program, right? The 5-year program and earning 15 master's credits, but also getting an entire class on dyscalculia and learning disabilities in math, and how teachers would be receptive to that 5-year program, because we talk about how teachers should be should earn more money. So we send doctors to school for what, 12 years plus? Teachers would want to do that 5-year program to get that extra training to feel more prepared when they step into the classroom, by having more of that practice time in the classroom over semesters. And so that was the real highlight, because it encompassed everything that you guys, group number 1, just said, right? By giving them that extra year. And then the highlight to get them to want to do it is the incentive for extra pay, extra support that they're getting in that teacher prep program, and then building that partnerships. Who works at a university that would want to have a pipeline with teachers coming out from that 5-year program? I would. So that was the highlight.
And I just want to add one other thing that came up that I really thought was pretty powerful. And I think it was the very first comment you made, Winifred, that what the skills, knowledge, and expertise for general ed and special education teachers, first thing you said is it's basically the same thing. That there was an enormous level of overlap. And, I think in some systems, there's a fairly large divergence between those paths. But I thought your comment that they're far more the same than they're different was also worth sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Group 3, highlights from your conversation.
Tom, I'll go and then you can jump in. We talked about the need for all teachers to really understand how to do trauma-informed practices. And that led us into a discussion about restorative practices and legislation that is in the General Assembly right now, which has passed both houses. And then sort of flip back to the 2006 report from the ad hoc committee on teacher preparation, which laid out what we thought all teachers needed to know to serve children with disabilities, including behavior intervention, how to make curriculum accessible, assistive technology, a lot of the basic issues, because even though Maryland puts kids with disabilities into separate school programs at one of the highest rates in the country, the reality is that most kids with disabilities are spending some amount of time in general ed. So all teachers need to know these basic things. And that report, I know, has been made available to MSDE. We talked about some of the barriers that higher ed institutions either create or are subject to in terms of trying to join gen ed and special ed, which have been traditionally so separate, and how difficult it's been to create dual certification programs in terms of credit hours, in terms of cost, and into the idea that Winifred just put forward, in terms of we had that discussion many years ago with somebody from Towson about how difficult it was for them to create the dual certification program, and because of the cost and credit hours and getting students to be able to participate. We both recognize, Tom and I, that teachers who have had deep experience in schools beyond student teaching or feel much more qualified when they enter the profession than those who just go through a traditional program and student teach, and then suddenly they're in a classroom. And then the last question, that higher ed has a big responsibility here, that this is not just all professional development. It's, you can't expect school systems to do the remedial education part of what teachers should have gotten in their higher ed programs. So a lot of this responsibility lands on higher ed in reframing what higher ed programs look like, to actually recognize that kids have changed over time and that these programs need to change over time. They can't do business the way they did it 15, 20 years ago. Tom, what did I miss?
Leslie, you did an outstanding job. The only thing I'd like to add is that, again, I'm a building level administrator of 700 students. I would say EL strategies are great for all kids. So, but I will also tell you, my new teachers come in with zero skills and 0 classes in EL. So EL special ed, they live together. The strategies work for all kids. And I think the paradigm shift at the university level is to start teaching kids. You teach kids first, content and everything else is second. So that pedagogy is great. But again, when teachers walk into these doors for the first time, like Leslie said, they need to be able to be prepared to work with the students in front of them, not to learn on the job the first day. They need to really come in with that skill set. So I brought up, we're doing an accelerant program in Washington County right now, where they actually work in a classroom for a full year before they even go out for a job, and they are paid on the job to learn that. So they're immersed into that learning, and those in my school are high EL and special needs students. So when they get a regular job, their first job, they're going to be prepared to take on students in a way that helps all kids. So I think those are the strategies. I think Leslie spoke very eloquently about it, much more so than I do. But we do believe that the university system is probably where it begins. I just think the connection between the LEAs and universities, we need to talk, and then implementation probably needs to go out quicker. If it ends up on someone else's desk or in another committee, it's not going to help kids.
Got it. Thank you, group 3. How about group 4? Highlights of your conversation.
I'm not sure what my group number is, so I'm just going to assume I'm number 4. Lisa, do you remember? So I
think we were 4.
Let's assume you were. I want to hear what your
I think we were 4.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. First thing is that thank you, Molly. Our comments are in the fact that in our group, there were no teachers. So we want to kind of preface our comments from a place of we don't, because we don't have the lived experience of being teachers, these are our thoughts. So they're very similar to what a lot of folks have talked about already, but I just like to highlight just a couple of things. One is really helping teachers coming in the door of presuming competence, right? Kids can do this. Kids can learn. Leslie talked about this as well. Really, kids are very, very, very different today than they were just even 10 years ago, heck, even 3 years ago. And then the other piece that we really talked about was this skill gap in the last bullet, because that, or if there isn't a skill gap, why are teachers leaving the profession in droves in less than 5 years, right? So really what we were talking about is, what is that feedback loop between higher ed and LEAs, and then what's that feedback loop within the LEA, right? So how is the central office supporting the administration? How's the administration supporting the teachers? And it just becomes this loop, so that we really are keeping the open lines of communication about what is really needed to support all of our kids, including kids with disabilities. The other piece we brought up is also this piece of really looking at highly specialized teachers for our preschool and our pre-K, so that maybe we can narrow that achievement gap at our youngest years. So we also talked about that in our group. And our theme was pay, really making sure that we are paying folks.
Great. Outstanding, thank you. And group 5.
So I guess I'll go for group 5. And Aggie's put a couple of comments in the section as well. So not to be a Debbie Downer, but I think one of the challenges when we talk about higher education and our teaching pool is that we hire a lot of teachers from out of state, which means we're limited in our ability to influence the skills and abilities coming in. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't attempt, but we need to recognize that. And we think that as part of any teaching curriculum, general ed or whatever, all of this should be incorporated into it, the differentiated instruction. For those folks that come in from out of state, we then tried to think about, okay, well, where are places that we could build that in? And we discussed, ensuring that all professional development includes components of this, whether it's modeling it or otherwise. There's a lot of practices where schools are paying for individuals to get their graduate degree or PhD or recertification. And if those are folks that are in state, those are places where we may be able to influence and ensure that this is being incorporated. We want to also, we talked about the disincentives, particularly the fact that special education requires more credits. And that costs more. And I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that that cost is a barrier in some instances. And then we also, along the lines of presumed competence and the skills, what does post-school success look like? What can it look like? What are the post-school options, so that both the general ed and the special educators are seen and have in their minds like really excellent examples of individuals with really significant disabilities who have been successful, so that their framework and their point of reference is beyond what their lived experience may have been, and they see what the outcome is.
Great, thanks. So one of really thoughtful conversations, 2 observations, and then we're going to transition to back to the breakouts for a follow-on discussion. It seems as I'm processing in real time what I heard, a really clear, thoughtful, and quite specific set of skills, knowledge, and expertise. So I think you've collectively really built a very nice list, with that understanding that gen ed and special ed will need pretty much the same list. I think also a very interesting but not fully conclusive conversation of, okay, how do we get this to work? We got people coming from other states. 5 years is great, but also perhaps challenging from a cost and time perspective. So I think that's going to be something where we're going to want to think more about, or have a MSDE research and think more about on the how to get there. But I think the list of skills seems really specific and really helpful. The next topic is, okay, we got teachers, we want more teachers. What are we going to do for recruitment and retention of special educators? I mean, this has been a long-standing problem, but it has gotten much more challenging since the pandemic. I think given the time, Dr. Hickman, unless you've got objections, rather than have you give a preamble, I'd love to get the group to share their thoughts on this. Anything you want to say before we go into the breakouts?
No, sir. I think we can move ahead.
All righty. So it is 20. Let's do 20 minutes. Whoever is our timekeeper on the breakout rooms, 20 minutes in the breakout. Those two key questions: what are short-term strategies that are going to enhance the supply and encourage retention? And then what are the long-term strategies? What we can do over, so let's get into the rooms, and I'm really interested in people's thoughts on these two questions. So.
Great, thank you, Nate. Opening the breakout rooms now, thank you.
Great. And we'll come back at
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, same setup, Liz. Same crew. Kelly, you with us? I don't see you.
Yep. Okay. All right. So question one is around short-term strategies around supply.
Ms. Perry, you gonna speak? Are you gonna speak? Ms. Perry, will you speak for us again? Or no?
Okay.
You gotta have a spokesman. I just asked. Does somebody else want to speak to this? All right, we like routines. Ms. Perry, you're back on.
Okay, so what short-term strategies will enhance supply and encourage retention of general and special educators?
Well, short term, I don't know. Morale is really bad right now. People are burnt out. We have very high absenteeism rates, and just this week we lost 2 teachers. So I can only speak for me. I think it doesn't help when systems aren't just upfront and acknowledge the state that we're in right now. And I'm not trying to be dismal, but it is pretty bad. Again, I have 30 years in this and I've never seen it like it is now, but acting like the real problem isn't there doesn't help. So just addressing and acknowledging and including teachers in some of the decision making. It doesn't help when people who are farthest away from the work make decisions and aren't, in the classrooms, in the schools. And I know some people come in and they do their little half-hour, half-day thing, but that's not the same as day in, day out. I think more central office staff being visible in the schools for longer stretches of time would be helpful. We can always save money, but that depends on where you are in your career. I'm at the top of the scale. There's nowhere else to go, no matter what I do. So that would be great, but that's not going to be the end all be all. So I think just for special ed teachers, yes, in the chat, the paperwork is ridiculous. Maybe hiring some clerical support. There might not be able to be someone in every school, but at least each cluster or something gets some position to help take some of that burden. At one point, I was on a task force where we looked at separating case management with teaching. So those are just some short-term things we can do for now.
Expound that last part. Did you say separate case management from teaching? Can you?
Yeah, so there are some models. We met in all the 24 counties. We have representation of special education service providers from across the state before COVID that met and talked about the special education teaching model. So in Maryland, there are different models. So there are some jurisdictions where you have a case manager and they basically do the meetings and do the paperwork, and that's part of the job. And then you have people who are just teaching. And I'm not saying that model is going to fit for every situation, but at least having opportunities for that to happen in some spaces could be very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Holman, we don't want to read anything. Literature and evidence-based and research, we want to know what practical things we can do. I'm only picking, I know.
Yeah, well, those are surveys from teachers. That's why I brought it up. But I would also comment, circling back to what we said about behaviors and the need for special educators to have ongoing coaching and support. So it's not helpful what I hear from teachers for example, a BCBA to come in and give them a list of 10 things they need to do differently in their courses, in their classes for students. It's really necessary to have the support staff and the resources to provide that ongoing coaching where that can be modeled and that guided feedback for implementation, because it just really exacerbates the frustration on teachers' part of not feeling successful when they get a list of things they need to do differently, but they don't know how or where to begin. And we know that the better you feel at your job, the more you love it, and then they're going to stay longer. So that, and also putting some money into creative efforts to be responsive to the mental health and stress that's contributing to the burnout in so many of our teachers right now.
Come on, team. Don't run out of energy. We're almost on the home stretch. What I heard, I just talked a little bit. So focus on the mental health of the staff. It sounded like culture, morale. I'm sure someone said pay, or it's going to, but short term. I'm going to go back to the question that you asked me at the end of our other question, like as a leader, right? As a person who was in a regional alternative special ed day school, and all the students were sent there from 7 districts, and it was all because of behavior. And how do you keep a morale of a team that's getting paid the same amount of teachers? Teachers get the same pay there as the teachers at the high school or the elementary or middle school that sent them out, right? Mm-hmm. On a lower scale, what you do is you make them appreciate coming to work, you value them, you respect them. The whole visible piece, some would minimize the importance of being visible, but what I knew was important was being in the classroom as whatever role I was in, but as a principal, being in the classroom. Then when I went to the district level, coming back and visiting and walking around and actually spending time and assisting. So morale is the short-term piece, that doesn't cost any money to have compassion and passion. Doesn't have that. Even in setting up some mental health time, some space, setting up something for self-care, having volunteers. And I know we're talking on a small scale, but how to scale that out? How do you make a recommendation for us? How do we change morale at MSDE level? That's going to be kind of difficult. So can someone answer that question? Other than money and pay and increasing pay from this level, from this team that you're on, what can we do to change the morale at a school? That's a short-term fix.
It just feels like there's a huge disconnect to people, like I said, who are farthest away from the work. And just like I think Kay said, you know, the someone comes in, has a checklist, tells you need to do this, this, and this. Okay, but we have long-term subs who are here filling 4 positions. We have staff that are missing. I'm covering classes, so I can't even do my job because I have to cover because we don't have enough support to do what needs to be done. We have, you know, students who are in crisis and their social emotional needs aren't being met. Our poor admin, my goodness, they never get to do their job because they're dealing with the students in crisis all day. Literally all day their walkies are going off. So I know there's not that anyone can do right now because we need bodies in the building, but just not making statements or mandates that are not feasible, appropriate, or safe. A lot of students and teachers don't feel safe because of the lack of human resources.
I hope you captured that. I'm trying to. Do not make statements that are feasible. Did you get it? No, come on. One more time, Ms. Perry, that last 3. Feasible, do not make statements.
Look now, I had a long day at work. You want me to repeat something that was profound and amazing?
It was profound.
Oh my goodness.
I want to tweet it out.
Well, in my psychology class, I learned that it really isn't good to multitask. So I wasn't writing while I was talking. No, I'm kidding.
I have don't make statements that are or mandates that are not feasible, appropriate, or safe. Is that good?
Perfect.
I wonder if anybody can comment about induction and mentoring. I'm wondering about I understand from listening to a recent Professional Standards and Teacher Education Board meeting that we used to talk about the number of teachers that would leave after, you know, before year 5, and now we're talking about it about year 3. So that would indicate to me either that teachers are feeling unprepared when they get there, or that they don't feel that they are being well supported in that initial period of time. Because, you know, just like any other profession, we shouldn't expect that teachers are going to walk in on day 1 and know everything. It's a really complicated job. You're going to have to learn a lot about doing it while you're doing it. But we should be anticipating that and figuring out how to support those early career teachers. So I just wonder if anybody has some thoughts about that.
Hi, Liz. I'd like to answer Dr. Hittman's first question, because I actually think that answers your question as well. I actually think it should that the issue of teacher retention and what we can do right now should probably be taken care of before we could concern ourselves about the new teachers coming in, because new teachers coming in, no matter how we induct them, train them right before they come in, once they get placed into the environment, the culture of that school is going to take over. They're going to hear what the other teachers have to say, and it's going to supersede anything that they were taught before they got there. So to answer Dr. Hittman's question, I really think there should be an open roundtable discussion, a town hall of such, with just the teachers in the school system, a private session between their central office and the teachers, where I wrote down that there should be a discussion about the state of where things are. And I don't mean that politician type conversation, a broad general overview without addressing the concerns that have already been done. We do have that in Charles County also, but it's very general. I think the teachers want a down and dirty, let's talk about the elephant in the room. So acknowledging that the real state of the school system is step number 1. Number 2 would be what has to change internally in order for this to happen. And what that means, that's a level of accountability on everybody that's in that room. So that conversation doesn't have anything to do with the students. We're not going to have a conversation about behavior, because at the end of the day, the needs of the students are not going to change. They're not, you know, not overnight. So to say we don't have resources, to say we don't have manpower, to say that we're afraid, while all those things are true, the problems and the needs of the students aren't going to change. So internally, the conversation needs to be what extra weight we need to carry in order to make this happen. I think there should be a redistribution of duties within the school system to make this happen, because there are teachers that are legitimately overworked and overstressed, and then there are some teachers that think they are overworked and overstressed, but technically they should be carrying more of this load and they are not. So I think an identification of who truly should be doing this duties needs to happen. So to the point of the case managers, this is what made me think about this. The general education teachers, I don't think need to be documenting all of these things. The paperwork that they're doing could be redistributed to someone else on that IEP team or any other team. And so deciding who can handle more of these administrative tasks that are very important and legal, we need to figure out who should be doing those other jobs and just redistribute some of this workload. But rather than just mandating it and doing it, I think having a conversation where everybody feels heard, it's a transparent conversation where it doesn't seem like any one central office is hiding anything, and we have the open dialogue, and whatever plan has been agreed upon is actually implemented. I think that in the short term, people will be more hopeful because they understand what to expect. They know what's happening. If we do this, then this is going to happen. So to your point, Dr. Hickman, this doesn't cost any more money. It's communication that both sides can buy into, and just to let them know we're on the same team and we're including you in this plan.
Thank you.
I would just speak Liz's
Maybe
question.
to the next question too. After this.
Okay, just about induction and mentoring. I think it's absolutely essential, but there isn't anybody in the building that's able to do that. So coming back to this teacher shortage, they're not there, and we have these conditional teachers that are in place now, promise mentors to support them, and they're not there as well. So, I mean, there's not even pedagogy or behavior management that is even knowledgeable of those students or those conditional teachers that are in there. So I think that's the challenge. So I'm circling back to our former conversation around teacher preparation and thinking about, are there innovative ways to have higher ed faculty to take up residencies in schools that also provides additional support, hands-on training, coaching, mentoring in the building that we're having right now. So I think I wanted to just quickly unpack. I know it's a bigger conversation, but an idea that my colleagues and I have been talking about.
We have 5 minutes, Liz.
Great. And I feel like the long term and short term has kind of gotten mixed together. So I'm not as concerned about whether we stick to question 1 or question 2. I love that idea, Dr. Holman. Thanks for bringing that up. I think that's really interesting.
How far along are you in that conversation?
Preliminarily, just kind of in response to the mass teacher shortages and exodus that we're having, and lower numbers in our programs. So even coming into the field in terms of recruitment.
So the recruitment.
I don't think that we included in the.
Sorry, Ted.
I don't think that we included in the. Oh, sorry. I don't think that we included in the materials that went out the data about conditional teachers, but we as a state, we are now over 5,000 conditional teachers, and we do have that data available for, and about more than 21% of them are special educators. So just, I do think that's a challenge.
Dr. Holman just presented something totally different. I don't know if anyone else caught it. The recruitment starts with recruiting them to go to college to be teachers. So whose responsibility? Who should take the lead on that? It's a question, because we can't be teachers if we can't get them to college to enroll. And so it's a teacher shortage, but you have a shortage of students enrolling to be teachers. And someone else asked the question before we came into this, related service providers too. So
yeah, I think recruitment efforts need to be more innovative in the way in meeting potential teachers where they are. We're doing a lot in high schools right now to start that recruitment earlier, but it's also the culture, like changing the culture and how we're perceiving and respecting the field that has been damaged in the last few years. I also think incentives go to school for education, because it is costly, as we've all been saying this. And so if there are more avenues of grants or scholarships for potential teachers, I think that would be really beneficial.
I was going to bring up the conversation about the CTE programs as well, because we have, I mean, it's already a pillar of this career technical education, but I think there should be an increased emphasis on teaching, and it should be available at all schools. And additionally, when we're talking about certifications, I know in some states you're able to offer employment upon graduation in the county where you went to school. So something where, I don't know, they complete a CTE program in the county, the school where they are. If they come back and teach at your school, right after graduation for 2-3 years, then some sort of financial incentive, having their loan forgiven or something like that. But we already have the training, like we already have the information and the capabilities in the school. So maybe we just repurpose what we already have.
I'm looking at the clock. My clock says 5:45, but I'm not cutting you off. Just letting you be prepared. Hey, Ms. Meisner, are you able to catch the stuff that's in the chat too? Okay.
Anybody else last minute? We got one more minute.
Just one quick announcement. We will be sending everyone back in about 60 seconds. Just heads up.
Holman, what does recruitment look like? Dr. Holman, sorry. What does recruitment look like at your level?
We do reaching, as I said, to high school students, to the Teachers of Academy of Maryland programs that are in high school already. We're also trying to do a more broad, like, social media outreach to teachers, to high school students.
Thank you.
Partnering.
Welcome back. We'll give another 10 seconds or so as a few more people pop back in. I want to do a quick time check. I know we gave a little extra time for the first session, a little less time for the second. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I'd like to spend about 10 minutes with the sharing out, and then we'll go into the exit ticket and wrap up. So this will be a little bit of speed sharing out. We definitely want to hear your ideas, but perhaps in bulleted form. So we'll go reverse order. Group 5, love to know your thoughts on recruitment and retention, either short-term or long-term. What are the ideas for consideration?
I'm going to let Aggie or Susanna take this one.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. We talked about some short-term strategies. The apprenticeship idea, using CTE programs. That's something we can kind of do more immediately. I think could have some benefit with retention. Some of the career path, we talked about career pathways in high schools and just having more teacher career pathways to get our young folks thinking about that sooner. Growing our peer educators, developing some tracks for them to become teachers and how we can develop them. And long term, we talked about things like sabbaticals, perhaps, like if you've been teaching for a certain amount of years, you've earned a sabbatical and you could take time to learn, enhance your skills. It just rewards people for staying. Looking at benefits, how universal are they? Do teachers feel like they can't move around the state based on where the need is? Is there fear for losing benefits? And that's something I'm not so much of an expert on, being from a non-public school, but that's something we discussed. Trying to enhance the ability to move to where you're needed. And then just changing expectations post-COVID. I think it was brought up a little earlier today, and just looking at, maybe more mental health supports in our schools for everyone, and just more trauma-informed care training. Teachers feel like they need more support in general, and there's a lot of burnout and people feeling overwhelmed.
Great.
Like the same thing.
No, that was a great list. And how about group 4?
Sure. So one of the things we talked about for a short-term strategy was, while health insurance is important when teachers are going to job fairs, it really would be probably more helpful if what are the types of supports that are being offered to that new teacher, and what does it look like, and how do we support you so that you really feel like you have a true safety net underneath yourself. And then the other piece we talked about was just really, it's kind of short-term, long-term, was real clear communication and expectations, but the tools to be able to meet those expectations. And then we talked a little bit about the fact of some long-term strategies is those, what are the, I liked the along the lines of the sabbatical, right? What are those kind of soft skills to really support that teachers and special educators are, have what they need, feeling heard, feeling really supported, and in a culture at a school, in a culture that is inclusive and accepting of all teachers, not just a silo of special ed goes here and regular ed goes over there.
Great, super thoughtful. Appreciate that. How about group 3, short and long-term strategies?
Sure. So one thing that we didn't talk about is money. That really isn't, in my experience, what keeps or makes people leave. What we mostly talked about is culture trumps, and that is both the short term and long term. Being happy where you work, believing that your mission is the right mission, believing that people are supportive of kids and reminding them of that, I think is what keeps people where they're at, be it special ed or general ed. I've been in the same school for 19 years, and I probably have 80% of the same staff in that amount of time. And we're a high need city school. That's because we fight the good fight, and we believe in kids. So I think if teachers go into a well-developed school that feels like they're doing the right things for kids, and that's why they went into this job field, that will retain teachers left and right. Everything else is great, but that's the bottom line.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I see some great comments in the chat as well. How about group 2? Winifred, if you share the highlights of that conversation.
Yep, I got bullets now. I'm going to be succinct. So short term, address immediate stressors, i.e. paperwork for special educators, support from leadership, because I said like the most helpful teacher is at capacity, right? We know if you're in the building and you're the most helpful, you're the one, you're at capacity. And then overall support the non-teaching duties that lead to burnout, right? That immediate need. Long term, recruitment and retention. I pulled up a job ad right here that's current right now. We went through it and we read through it, and I gave the example of how someone who is qualified to teach would not meet the minimum qualifications. So we've got to look at HR and recruitment, because everything that we're talking about here, if it doesn't align with how we bring folks into the organization, is all for nothing. I just pulled up a active job ad, and someone who was qualified would not have met the minimum qualifications based on how things are written. And lastly, I talked about how do we get more special education teachers rebranding. It's all about marketing. My daughter and I was just on the Kelly Clarkson show last month, and when I said my daughter is dyslexic, off air, she told me that so many celebrities are neurodivergent, right? So I said, rebrand it. Be the next public educator that's going to teach the next Richard Branson, right? So attract more teachers in that way. But in special education, in public schools, special education, there's such a negative connotation. Let's rebrand special education, because I'm just going to say it. I'm not the only neurodivergent adult on this call, you know, so.
Great, I appreciate that. And last but definitely not least, group one.
All right, I will be additive instead of repetitive. We talked about consistent support. Culture and morale came up quite frequently. I love the suggestion that we have open roundtables with teachers and district level staff in each district and talk about the state of teaching, how it really is, and more listening. We talked about need for creative efforts to be put into burnout for mental stress and for teachers, more money to support programs, opportunities for coaching, more presence of central office staff, consistent support across the board, not making mandates that are not feasible or safe for students and staff. For recruitment again, decreasing the paperwork and need for special education to have ongoing coaching in all areas.
Great. Well, thank you. Again, really thoughtful conversations. I think some very specific ideas. We will collate them and share them back in the summaries. I think we really, lot of great ideas surfaced today. So I want to thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to bring us through the home stretch.
Okay, so it's that time again to talk about exit ticket reflections. So I just want to reiterate how critical that taking a couple minutes, thinking through everything that you heard, and then pulling out the things that for you rise to the top. And putting them down. It really, when we go through all the exit ticket reflections, it's incredibly helpful for people to have the deep thinking that comes from that is so clear. So I really appreciate that. So that's what we're going to do now. Everyone will have the exit ticket, I assume, in your email. It's not here yet, I don't think. You are going to get it, and these will be the questions. And, you know, the sooner the better, but, you know, by Sunday, it would be great so that we can, you know, get those takeaways back to you and kind of keep the process going. Nate, do we want to take a minute for people to jot down a few things right now?
Yeah, I think that'd be really good. It's very top of mind. Let's just be quiet for a minute or two while people summarize their own thinking.
Great. Okay, maybe we should come back. I do want, I think Brian Morrison's going to give us a minute on the interim report, if I'm not mistaken. I think that might be what's next.
You are not mistaken.
All right.
So at the next meeting, we will provide the outline of the next report, which is due, an interim report, which is due July 1, 2024. We will have a first draft to the work group on May 6th, or by May 6th, I should say, and give you at least 2 weeks up until May 20th to review it and provide feedback. We'll then integrate that feedback into the current report and get it approved by leadership here at MSDE for submission to the AIB on or before July 1, 2024. But we wanted to emphasize that we know that with the initial report, we did not give you 2 weeks, and we will ensure that we do so. We have begun to write the report, and like I said, we'll show you the outline next meeting. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Hickman.
Awesome. You'll see in the chat that I put the exit ticket, and you will receive it also by email if you don't capture it this evening. You'll see our next meeting is April 24th, another virtual opportunity. And with that, the guiding question is going to be, what evidence-based service delivery models for special education and related services could be implemented that would improve student achievement, be sustainable, improve working conditions, and encourage retention of educators? Of course, you'll get the pre-reading and documents in time so that you can provide your feedback. Also, you'll get takeaways from this meeting, reading recommendations, and any requested data or questions that came from the conversations. For those who are watching, this will be posted after it's remediated at that website. Next slide, or is that it? All right, that's the list of our future meeting dates. And with that, on behalf of Dr. Wright and Dr. Collins, thank you for participating. Sorry that they had to either couldn't make it or had to leave early, but thank you all. And we will see you again next month, April 24th.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.
It's okay. It should be okay.